My daughter, Jessica, believed my life savings were already hers. To speed up the transfer, she left me her 69-year-old father stranded on a remote Arizona highway with a single bottle of water. She drove off in her luxury SUV back to the penthouse I paid for, expecting my desperate call. She had no idea that the moment she disappeared over the horizon, my old life ended and a new one began. A life where I would make my own calls, starting with a locksmith, and then my lawyer. Before I tell you what happened next, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. The silence inside Jessica's car was a specific kind of silence. It was expensive. The engine purred so quietly you could barely hear it, and the insulated doors blocked out the rush of the desert wind, reducing the vast Arizona landscape to a silent film playing outside the tinted windows. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the red rock formations and the stoic saguaro cacti pass by like old friends. This was supposed to be our annual trip, the one I'd taken with her mother Laura every year. After Laura passed, I kept the tradition alive, hoping to share with Jessica the quiet beauty her mother had loved so much. But for Jessica, silence was just empty space that needed to be filled. She was on the phone with her husband Kyle. Her voice, sharp and confident, cut through the engineered quiet of the cabin. She had the phone on speaker, a habit I found arrogant, as if she assumed anyone within earshot would be fascinated by her business. But it wasn't her business. It was mine. "Kyle, just tell them the portfolio is solid," she said, one hand tapping impatiently on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. "The power of attorney is ironclad. We just need him to sign off on the last transfer, and we can start the liquidation process Monday." Liquidation. The word hung in the air-conditioned car like a vulture. It was a cold, sterile word for what felt like dismantling a life's work. My work. I didn't turn my head. I kept my eyes fixed on a distant butte, its flat top standing resolute against the impossibly blue sky. Laura would have loved that view. She would have made me pull over, and we would have just sat and watched the shadows move. But Jessica didn't even see it. Her world was reflected in the polished screen of her phone. "Is he being difficult?" Kyle's voice crackled through the speakers, thin and reedy. "He's just slow." Jessica sighed, glancing at me for a fraction of a second, as if checking to see if I was still breathing. "He keeps asking questions, wants to read everything. It's like he doesn't trust me." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. For the past year, Kyle and Jessica had been managing my investments. They called it modernizing my assets, and they used words like synergy and leveraging and aggressive growth. I was a retired urban planner. I understood blueprints and foundations, things that were built to last. Their world was one of abstract figures and rapid trades, a world I didn't pretend to understand. I had trusted them. I had trusted my daughter. "Just get the signature," Kyle urged. "The market is primed for this. We can double his net worth in 18 months. Double his net worth. It sounded more like they were talking about a client, a Mark, not a father. Not the man who had taught her how to ride a bike, who had held her hand on her first day of school, who had paid for the education that now gave her the vocabulary to sell off his future. This trip was her latest tactic. She'd brought a briefcase full of documents, planning to have me sign them at the hotel tonight, framing it as a necessary step to secure her inheritance. "To make things easier for everyone later, Dad," she had said. Laura would have seen right through it. She had a gentle way about her, but her eyes missed nothing. She understood people's foundations, the things they were really built on. She had always been a little wary of Kyle, of his easy charm and expensive shoes. "A man's character isn't in his suit, David," she used to say. "It's in his handshake." Kyle's handshake was firm, but his eyes were always moving, always calculating. I should have listened to my memory of her. I should have paid more attention. "I'll handle it," Jessica said, ending the call. The silence returned, heavier this time, filled with unspoken things. She turned up the music, a generic pop song with a pulsing beat that felt like an intrusion, in the sacred quiet of the desert. She thought I was just an old man, a relic from a slower time who didn't understand the modern world. She was about to learn that some old things like rock and resolve don't break. They just wait. I let another mile of silence pass, letting her words settle into the foundation of a new reality. Then I turned my head slowly and looked at her. My voice was calm, much calmer than the tremor I felt in my chest. "What investment is that, Jessica?" Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. It was a small movement, but I saw it. "It's nothing, Dad. Just some portfolio adjustments. Kyle is handling it." "You used the word liquidation," I said, keeping my tone even. "And power of attorney. That sounds like more than an adjustment. It's my money. I deserve to know what's happening with it." A flash of annoyance crossed her face. The mask of the dutiful daughter slipped, revealing the impatient heiress beneath. "You don't get it," she snapped. "The market is complicated now. We're being proactive. We're trying to build a future, our future." "Our future," I asked. "Or your future, because it sounds like you're cashing out my life's work for a quick profit." That was when the dam broke. The frustration that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted into rage. "Oh, here we go, St. David and his life's work. It's just money, Dad. It's sitting in these boring low-yield funds collecting dust. Kyle and I have a chance to do something real with it, to build something huge. But you're too old, too scared to take a risk." "It's not about risk, Jessica. It's about respect," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Respect for your mother's memory, which this trip is supposed to be about. And respect for me. You bring me out to the middle of nowhere with a briefcase full of papers you hope I won't read carefully. Because you wouldn't understand them anyway," she screamed, her voice echoing in the car. "You'd just slow everything down like you always do. You are holding me back." Her words hit me harder than any physical blow. Holding her back. The child I had given everything to, the daughter I had stayed up with when she was sick. The one I had cheered for at every graduation. And now I was just an obstacle. With a furious cry, she swerved the car violently onto the shoulder of the highway, sending a cloud of red dust billowing into the air. The tires screeched to a halt. We were miles from anything a single isolated vehicle under the vast, indifferent sky. "If you can't trust me," she seethed, her face twisted with anger, "then maybe you need some time alone to think about it." Before I could process what was happening, she got out, slammed her door, and walked around to my side of the car. She wrenched the passenger door open. "Get out." I stared at her, stunned into silence. "What get?" "Out," she repeated, her voice low and dangerous. "I am done arguing with you. I am done being held back." She reached into the back and grabbed my suitcase, a sturdy old piece of luggage I'd had for 30 years. She threw it onto the dusty ground. Then she took out the single bottle of water I had next to my seat and tossed it beside the suitcase. "When you're ready to stop being an obstacle and start being a supportive father, you can call me," she said, her voice dripping with venom. She knew there was no cell service out here. The words were a final cruel twist of the knife. I got out of the car, my legs feeling unsteady. I couldn't believe this was happening. This was my daughter, my Jessica. But the woman in front of me was a stranger, her eyes cold and hard. She got back into the driver's seat without another look at me, slammed the door, and hit the gas. The luxury SUV shot back onto the highway, spitting gravel from its tires. I stood there, a 69-year-old man, alone on the side of a deserted road, and watched as my only child drove away, leaving me in a cloud of red dust. The dust settled slowly, coating my shoes, my clothes, my skin. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was absolute. There was no wind, no sound of other cars, nothing but the faint hum of the heat rising from the asphalt. The SUV was a speck in the distance, then it was gone. I was alone. I looked down at my suitcase, then at the bottle of water. My first instinct was a wave of pure, cold fear. I was miles from the nearest town. The sun was relentless. A man my age couldn't last long out here. But then something else washed over me. A strange, unexpected calm. The anger and the hurt were still there, but they were beneath a surface of crystal-clear clarity. For years I had been living in a fog of denial, making excuses for Jessica's selfishness, for Kyle's greed. I had told myself she was just ambitious, that she loved me in her own way. But the dust from her tires had wiped all that away. She hadn't just left me on the side of a road. She had shown me exactly who she was. She had shown me what I meant to her. I was not a father. I was a resource, an account to be drained, an obstacle to be removed. I looked up at the vast, empty sky. I thought of Laura. I thought of the life we had built, the values we had shared. We believed in hard work and integrity and leaving things better than you found them. Jessica had abandoned all of it. She had abandoned me. The shock was fading, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to die out here. And I wasn't going to call her begging for forgiveness. The man she had left in the dust was gone. The man who stood here now was someone different. He was someone who finally saw the truth. I unscrewed the cap on the bottle of water and took a long, slow drink. The water was warm, but it felt like the clearest, purest thing I had ever tasted. I put the cap back on, picked up the handle of my old suitcase, and turned to face the long road ahead. I started to walk. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer walking in her shadow. I was walking toward myself. The asphalt was hot enough to cook on. Every step I took on the shoulder of the highway was a deliberate act of will. The sun beat down on my head, and the silence was broken only by the crunch of my dress shoes on the gravel. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me but a ghost in a cloud of dust. I focused on a point on the horizon and just kept walking. For the first time in a long time, my path felt entirely my own. After about an hour, a deep rumbling grew behind me. It was the sound of something real, something solid. A large 18-wheeler slowed down its air brakes, hissing like a giant metal beast exhaling. It pulled over about 50 feet ahead of me. The passenger door swung open. The driver, a large man with a graying beard and a kind face under a worn-out baseball cap, leaned across the cab. "You look like you're in a bit of a fix, friend," he called out. "Everything all right?" I walked up to the cab, shielding my eyes from the sun. I felt the grime and sweat on my face. "Having some car trouble a few miles back," I said. The lie came easily, smoothly. It wasn't a lie of shame, but of privacy. The full story was mine, a valuable new possession I wasn't willing to share. "My phone's not getting a signal." The driver nodded, his expression unquestioning. "Happens all the time out here. The desert doesn't care much for technology." "My name's Gus. Where you headed?" "Just to the next town," I replied. "Whatever's closest. I need to get to a bus station." "Well, hop in," Gus said, gesturing to the seat. "I can get you to Kingman. Better than standing out here talking to the lizards." I hoisted my suitcase into the cab, the old handle feeling solid in my hand. The air inside the truck was cool and smelled faintly of coffee and diesel. It was the smell of work, of a world that ran on schedules and tangible goods, not abstract portfolios. It was comforting. "Appreciate this more than you know, Gus," I said, settling into the surprisingly comfortable seat. "Don't mention it," he grunted, shifting the massive gears. The truck lurched forward, rejoining the highway. "Can't leave a man stranded. Bad karma." We didn't talk much after that. Gus seemed to understand that I wasn't in the mood for conversation. He turned on a classic rock station, and the familiar sound of guitars filled the space between us. I watched the landscape I had walked through now slide by with effortless speed. From this high vantage point, the desert seemed less menacing, more beautiful. I saw its patterns, the way the rocks were layered, the patient resilience of the cacti. It was all a matter of perspective. Gus dropped me off at a dusty bus station on the edge of town. I thanked him again, offering him some money for his trouble, but he just waved it away. "Pay it forward sometime," he said, and with another hiss of the air brakes, he was gone. Inside the station, the air was still and thick with the smell of disinfectant. A tired-looking woman sat behind a plexiglass window. I walked up to the counter. "One ticket to the city," I said. "One way." The words felt significant as I said them. One way. There was no going back. Not to that road, not to that argument, not to the life of willful blindness I had been living. She printed the ticket and slid it under the glass. I paid in cash. The bus ride was long. I got a window seat and watched Arizona bleed into Nevada and then into the familiar landscapes of home. My phone was still in my pocket, turned off. I felt no urge to turn it on, no curiosity about whether Jessica had tried to call, no desire to hear her voice. Her voice was a noise from a life that was no longer mine. My mind, which should have been a storm of anger and betrayal, was instead preternaturally calm. It was sharp. As a planner, my job had been to look at complex systems at empty lots and decaying neighborhoods and see a new order. I would draw up blueprints, create frameworks, and build new structures. I realized as I watched the power lines blur into a single thread against the sky that this is what I was doing now. My life had become a mismanaged development project. The foundation, the one Laura and I had laid, was strong, built on love and mutual respect. But the structure built on top of it had become rotten. Jessica and Kyle were not building. They were demolishing piece by piece for scrap. They thought I was the old historic building they were waiting to condemn. They had miscalculated. They had forgotten that I was the one who drew the original plans. I knew where every support beam was. I knew the zoning laws. And I knew that sometimes to save a foundation, you have to tear down everything that has been built on top of it. The bus slowed as we entered the city limits. The setting sun glinted off the familiar skyline. The glass towers and concrete canyons were my old workspace. I knew this city's bones. As the bus pulled into the terminal, the plan was already forming in my mind, a clear and logical blueprint. There would be no shouting, no emotional scenes. This would be a quiet, orderly demolition. It would all start with a single, crucial phone call. And I knew exactly who I was going to call. The taxi dropped me off at the end of the driveway. I paid the driver, and as he pulled away, I stood for a moment just looking at my house. It wasn't a mansion, not like the glass and steel structures Jessica favored. It was a 2-story brick colonial solid and unassuming, nestled among oak trees that Laura and I had planted when we were young. It was the house where we had raised our daughter, the place where every brick was mortared with a memory. It was home. The key felt cool and familiar in my hand. It slid into the lock with a well-worn click. The door swung open into silence. Not the manufactured silence of a luxury car, but the deep, layered silence of a life. The air inside was still, and smelled of old books and the faint, lingering scent of the lemon polish Laura always used on the wooden floors. I set my suitcase down by the door. It looked out of place here, covered in the red dust of my betrayal. I walked through the living room, my footsteps echoing slightly on the hardwood. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The worn leather armchair where I read the paper, the stack of books on the side table the Afghan Laura had knitted draped over the back of the sofa. This house wasn't a showpiece. It was a testament. It was a record of a shared life, a quiet legacy of love and partnership. It was everything Jessica had decided was worthless. My eyes were drawn to the mantelpiece above the fireplace. It was lined with photographs, a timeline of our family. There was Jessica on her first day of school, a gap-toothed smile, and a backpack almost as big as she was. There was our wedding photo, me looking impossibly young, in a rented tuxedo, Laura radiant beside me. And there was the one I always came back to, the last photo we took together. I picked it up. It was from our final trip to Arizona 5 years ago. We were standing at an overlook, the same kind of red rock canyons stretching out behind us. I had my arm around her, and she was leaning into me, her face turned toward the sun, a genuine peaceful smile on her lips. She had loved that place. She said the silence there wasn't empty, it was full of answers. Looking at her smile, I finally understood the depth of Jessica's transgression. She hadn't just abandoned me on a highway. She had desecrated a memory. She had taken something sacred, a tradition meant to honor her mother, and had tried to twist it into a tool for her own greed. The penthouse, the cars, the endless river of money I had supplied since Laura's passing. I had done it all wrong. I thought I was giving her a cushion to soften the blow of losing her mother. Instead, I had built her a throne, and from that throne she had judged my life, my legacy, and me, and found us all wanting. A wave of profound sadness washed over me, but it brought no tears. Tears were for a different kind of grief. This was a cold, hard sorrow for the daughter I thought I had, and the stranger she had become. The betrayal wasn't just against me. It was against Laura. It was against the woman in this photograph, the woman who had believed in kindness, integrity, and the simple grace of a life well lived. I placed the photograph carefully back on the mantel, my fingers lingering on the cool glass. My house was quiet, but I could almost hear Laura's voice, practical and calm as always. "Well, David," she would say, "what are you going to do about it?" I walked into the kitchen. The familiar weight of the kettle in my hand was grounding. I filled it with water and set it on the stove. I opened the cupboard and took down my favorite mug, the one Jessica had painted for me in a pottery class when she was 10. It was lopsided and the glaze was uneven, but it was real. I took a simple black tea bag from the canister. The small ritualistic movements were an anchor in the storm of my thoughts. As I waited for the water to boil, I looked out the kitchen window at the old oak tree in the backyard. I had a choice. I could let the rot that had taken hold of my daughter's heart spread to mine. I could let bitterness and rage be the final chapter of my story. Or I could do what a planner does. I could assess the structural damage, condemn the parts that were beyond saving, and reinforce the foundation. The kettle whistled a shrill, clean sound that cut through the silence. I poured the steaming water over the tea bag and watched the color bleed into the mug, a slow infusion of warmth and strength. This was my house. This was my life. This was Laura's legacy. And I would not let it be liquidated. I would not let it be turned into another one of Jessica's social media posts. I carried the warm mug back to my armchair and sat down. The silence of the house no longer felt empty. It felt like a war room. It was the quiet before the first move in a game my daughter didn't even know we were playing. I took a sip of the tea. It was hot and strong. It was time to call my lawyer. I sat in my leather armchair for a long time, letting the last of the evening light fade from the room. The tea in my mug had gone cold. Outside, the world was quieting down for the night, but inside my mind, everything was coming into sharp, painful focus. The house was no longer just a home. It was a fortress whose defenses had been compromised from within. It was time to secure the perimeter. My phone lay on the side table, a sleek black rectangle that Jessica had insisted I get last Christmas. "You need to be connected, Dad," she'd said, smiling her bright, polished smile. The irony was bitter. She had given me the very tool I would now use to sever the connection she had so thoroughly abused. I picked it up. Its weight felt foreign, a piece of her world, in the familiar comfort of mine. My thumb hovered over the screen. I swiped it open, my contacts list appearing in a neat alphabetical column. My finger scrolled down past family members, past old colleagues, past the number for the local library. I saw her name, Jessica, with a smiling photo of her next to it taken at a charity gala I had paid for. I looked at the photo for a moment. The smile didn't reach her eyes. It never had. I continued scrolling without pausing. Then I found the name I was looking for. Ben Carter. Ben wasn't just a lawyer. He was a landmark in the topography of my life. We had known each other for nearly 50 years, since we were two ambitious young men trying to make our mark on the world. He was the one who had reviewed the mortgage on this very house. He was the one who had held my hand literally in the hospital waiting room the night Jessica was born. He and his wife had been our closest friends. Laura had adored him. "Ben sees the world in black and white," she used to say fondly. "It's a comfort to know where the lines are." After Laura passed, Ben was the one who helped me set up the initial trust, the one designed to provide for Jessica while protecting my assets. He had been cautious even then. "It's a lot of leeway, David," he had warned, pointing a pen at a clause regarding managerial access. "Are you sure?" I had waved his concerns away. "She's my daughter, Ben. She'll do the right thing." How hollow those words sounded now. Ben had seen the potential for a problem in the fine print of a legal document. I had only seen the face of my little girl. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the call button. I knew what I had to do. This couldn't be a conversation filled with emotion. It had to be a set of instructions. Clean, precise, irrevocable. The phone rang twice, and then his voice came on the line, familiar and steady as a rock. "David," he said. There was a warmth in his voice, the easy comfort of old friendship. "Good to hear from you. Everything okay?" I looked across the darkened room at the portrait on the mantel. I kept my voice perfectly level, stripping it of the day's turmoil, leaving only the cold, hard steel of my decision. "Ben, I need to see you." The warmth in his voice instantly receded, replaced by a focused attention. He knew my tone. He knew this wasn't a social call. "Of course, well, what's on your mind tomorrow morning?" I continued, my words measured. "We have a lot to do. I want to review everything. The trust Laura and I set up, the power of attorney I signed last year, and especially I want to discuss the title and ownership of the penthouse downtown." There was a short pause on the other end of the line. It wasn't a pause of confusion, but of understanding. Ben was connecting the dots. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need the story. The story was written in the words I had chosen. Review meant revoke. Discuss meant reclaim. He knew that for me to make this call, a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. "I'll clear my schedule," he said finally, his voice now all business, the voice of the man Laura had called a comfort. "My first meeting is at 9, but I'll move it. Be at my office at 8 a.m. We'll get it done." "Thank you, Ben," I said. "Don't thank me, David," he replied, and I could hear the grim resolve in his voice. "Just be ready." We said our goodbyes, and I ended the call. I placed the phone back on the table, face down. The first step was taken. The first move had been made in a game I never wanted to play. I felt no satisfaction, no thrill of impending revenge, just the somber, heavy weight of necessity. I had spent a lifetime building things for my daughter. Now I would spend the next phase of my life taking it all back, not to punish her, but to protect the foundation of everything my wife and I had stood for. The sun had set completely. The house was dark, but for the first time all day I could see the path forward clearly. Ben Carter's office was on the 32nd floor of a building that overlooked the entire city. From his window you could see the architectural spine of the metropolis, a landscape of glass, steel, and concrete that I had spent my career helping to shape. But his office itself felt like it belonged to another time. The walls were lined with dark wood shelves, crammed with thick, leather-bound law books that smelled of history and precedent. His desk was a vast expanse of mahogany, orderly and imposing. It was a room built for facts, a place where sentimentality came to be translated into the cold, hard language of the law. Ben sat behind the desk, his hands steepled in front of him, his face a mask of controlled neutrality. But I knew him too well. I could see the storm gathering in his eyes. I had told him everything. I started with the tense silence in the car, and ended with the sound of my own footsteps on the lonely gravel shoulder of the highway. I recounted the story with the detached precision of a man reading a surveyor's report. I listed the facts, the words spoken, the actions taken. I did not speak of my own pain or fear. I did not have to. Ben felt it for me. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. He didn't offer condolences or express shock. He simply picked up a heavy old-fashioned fountain pen from his desk and rolled it between his thumb and forefinger. I could see the muscle in his jaw clenching and unclenching. It was the only outward sign of the fury that was building inside him. This was not just a client's story to him. This was an offense against a friend, an offense against the memory of a woman he had respected, and an offense against the basic decency he valued above all else. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and tight. She left you. For dead, for all she knew. Over money. Over her own impatience. He shook his head, not in disbelief, but in disgust. All right, David. Emotion is off the table now. This is a matter of structure. Let's look at the blueprints. With a new energy, he turned to a thick file folder on his desk that had my name on it. He opened it, and the quiet, thoughtful friend disappeared, replaced by the sharp, methodical lawyer Laura had always trusted. He spread a series of documents across the polished surface of the desk, like a surgeon laying out his instruments. There was the deed to the penthouse, the articles of my primary investment trust, and the power of attorney agreement I had so foolishly signed. Here's the good news, Ben said, his finger tapping on the deed. And it's very good news. You are the sole unencumbered owner of that penthouse. Your name is on the deed. Period. He then slid the power of attorney document next to it. This, he said with contempt, is what Jessica and Kyle have been operating under. They've been treating it like a blank check, like it gave them ownership. But it doesn't. It gives them managerial access contingent on acting in your best interest. It's a leash, David, not a title. And by abandoning you, by conspiring to liquidate your assets against your will, she has violated her fiduciary duty so profoundly that she has effectively handed us the knife to cut that leash for good. A weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying began to lift. I had feared I had signed away more than I understood, that my trust had rendered me powerless. We can take it all back, Ben said, his eyes now glinting with a cold fire. Every dime, every square foot. And we can do it quietly, quickly, and legally. It's time to remind your daughter that a foundation is not just a thing you build on. It's a thing that can be taken away. He leaned forward, his focus absolute. The plan was already fully formed in his mind. Here is what we are going to do, effective immediately. First, we draft a revocation of power of attorney. I will have a courier deliver it to her husband's office by noon. From that moment on, her authority over your financial affairs ceases to exist. She will be locked out of every account she has access to. He took a fresh legal pad and began to write, his pen scratching against the paper. Second, the penthouse. We are not just taking it back. We are protecting it forever. We will create a new irrevocable trust. This is a legal fortress. Once the property is in the trust, it cannot be touched by her, by Kyle, or by any creditors they might have now or in the future. It will be completely secure. He paused and looked up at me. I suggest we name it the Laura Sterling Memorial Trust. I simply nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He had understood without me saying a word. This was not about revenge. This was about restoring a legacy. Third, he continued, his voice relentless. The money. Any secondary credit cards or bank accounts you've given her access to, we freeze them. We call the banks this morning and change all the security protocols. The river of cash that has been funding her lifestyle will turn to desert sand. She will discover this not from a letter, but from the quiet embarrassment of a declined transaction. He put the pen down and looked at me, his gaze steady. And finally, we do this the right way. No angry phone calls. No dramatic confrontations from you. My firm will send a formal registered letter to her and her husband, outlining every action we have taken and the legal grounds for doing so. It will inform them that any further attempts to access your assets will be met with immediate legal action. It will be cold, professional, and absolute. He pushed a document toward me. It was the revocation form. "This is where it begins, David," he said, "with your signature." I picked up the heavy fountain pen he offered me. It felt solid and real in my hand. For years, my signature had been an act of generosity, an act of trust. Now it was an act of preservation. I looked at the line at the bottom of the page. It was just a space waiting for a name. My name. I uncapped the pen, and with a steady hand, I brought the nib down to the paper. The scratch of pen on parchment was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a door being locked. It was the sound of a foundation being reclaimed. I returned home from Ben's office just before noon. The morning sun filled the house with a bright, uncompromising light that left no room for shadows. After the meeting, the world felt different, as if a filter had been removed from my eyes. The path forward was no longer a vague idea. It was a series of clear, executable steps. The first step was not on a legal document, but right here at my own front door. I didn't sit down. I didn't take off my coat. I stood in the entryway, took out my phone, and searched for a local locksmith. The call was brief and to the point. "I need every exterior lock on my house replaced," I said to the man who answered. "Today, if possible." Less than an hour later, a young man in a blue work shirt arrived. He was quiet and professional, with a toolbox that looked like it contained every possible solution to a problem of access. He didn't ask why I needed the locks changed. He simply got to work. I made him a cup of coffee and then sat in my armchair, not to relax, but to bear witness. The first sound was the metallic grating of the screwdriver against the old brass lock set on the front door. It was a sound of careful deconstruction, of a connection being methodically undone. For years, Jessica had a key to that lock. She could come and go as she pleased, a privilege she had long ago begun to treat as a right. With every turn of the screwdriver, I felt that unearned right being rescinded. Then came the high-pitched, almost surgical whine of the power drill as the locksmith cleaned the borehole in the heavy oak door. It was an invasive sound, the noise of alteration. It was the sound of something being changed in a way that could not be easily reversed. It was the necessary pain of shoring up a defense, of carving out a weakness to make the structure stronger. I listened as he unwrapped the new hardware. The crisp crackle of the plastic packaging was the sound of something new, something untouched by the past. The new lock was heavy and shone with the promise of security. He fitted it into place, his movements economical and precise. Then came the sound that I had been waiting for. He slid the new deadbolt into its housing for the first time. It wasn't a click. It was a solid, authoritative thud. It was the sound of a heavy bar of steel seating into a reinforced frame. It was the sound of a boundary being declared, the sound of a gate closing. He handed me a small ring with 3 freshly cut keys. They felt sharp and substantial in my palm. They were keys to my own life, and for the first time I was the sole keeper. After he left, I closed the front door. The latch caught with a sharp, clean click that was deeper and more final than the old one. I stood there for a moment, just listening to the renewed silence of my home. It was the same house, the same room, but it was no longer a place of vulnerable trust. It was a fortress, and I was finally in command. The heavy fountain pen felt like a relic from another age in my hand. It was Ben's pen, the one he reserved for moments that mattered. In front of me, stacked in a neat, formidable pile, was the paperwork that would fundamentally reshape my life. A paralegal had brought it in her expression, neutral, as she laid out the future in a series of signature lines. This was the architecture of my decision, and Ben was walking me through the blueprints one last time. He slid the primary document to the top of the pile. It was thick, bound in a simple blue cover. The title on the front was printed in a clean, conservative font. The Laura Sterling Memorial Trust. Seeing her name there so formally felt both strange and deeply right. It was as if she were in the room with us, a silent, approving witness. "This is the fortress," David Ben said, his voice quiet but firm. He tapped the cover. "Once your signature is on this document, and we file it with the county clerk this afternoon, the transfer of the penthouse and your other major properties into the trust is legally binding and, most importantly, irrevocable." He opened the document to a specific page already marked with a small yellow tab. Section 3. Beneficiaries. He slid the page across the desk so I could read it. My eyes scanned the dense legal text, but my mind focused on the name listed there. It was not Jessica Thorne. It was the Haven House for Women, a local shelter that Laura had volunteered at for over a decade. Laura poured her heart into that place, Ben said, as if reading my thoughts. I remember her coming home from their fundraisers not tired but energized. She used to say that true wealth wasn't about having enough to buy anything you wanted, but about having enough to give someone else a chance to start over. He paused, letting the weight of her memory settle in the room. It felt right. That the property bought with the money you two built together should be used to honor her legacy, to give other women a safe place to land. I looked at the words on the page. Haven House. A safe place. That's what my own home had just become for me again. And that is what the penthouse, a monument to Jessica's entitlement, would now become for others. The symmetry was just. Ben turned another page. Section 5. Trustee and Administration. He pointed to a line. You, David Sterling, are named the sole lifetime trustee. That means you have full control over the trust's assets. It also grants you lifetime tenancy rights. You can live in your home or the penthouse or any other property in the trust for the rest of your life rent-free. Your security is the bedrock of this entire structure. You are giving away your estate, not your home. Then he turned to the final relevant page. And here he said, his voice devoid of any triumph, stating it as a simple hard fact. This is the exclusionary clause. It explicitly names Jessica Thorne and her husband Kyle Thorne and states that they are to receive no financial benefit from this trust, neither now nor upon your passing. It is airtight, David. It is designed to withstand any challenge they might throw at it. They will get nothing. Nothing. The word was so absolute. I thought of Jessica as a little girl, how she would hold out her hands for a cookie, her eyes wide. I had spent my entire life filling her hands, and now by her own actions they would be empty. I felt a pang of sorrow, not for the money, but for the daughter I had lost somewhere along the way. I looked at Ben, and he nodded a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of the moment. I took the pen. Its metal body was cool against my skin. I thought of all the other things I had signed for Jessica. Report cards, permission slips, checks for tuition checks for a down payment on a car, the power of attorney. All of them acts of faith signed with a father's love. This signature was different. This was not an act of faith, but an act of clarity. It was not a gift, but a reckoning. It was the last signature I would ever write for my daughter. I put the nib to the paper. The ink flowed dark and permanent. I wrote my name, David Sterling. The letters were steady. When I was done, I placed a single deliberate period at the end. A full stop. I pushed the document back across the desk. A notary who had been waiting quietly in the corner stepped forward and affixed her seal. The sound of the embosser pressing into the paper was a satisfying final thud. It was done. The fortress was built. The legacy was secure. And the ink was already starting to dry. While the sound of new locks was settling into the quiet of my home, a different kind of sound was echoing in my daughter's world. It was the quiet, humiliating beep of a declined transaction. I wasn't there to see it, of course, but I had funded that lifestyle for so long that I could picture the scene as if I were standing right there beside her. She would have been in one of those downtown boutiques where the price tags are kept tastefully hidden and the air smells of expensive leather and French perfume. She was probably holding a handbag, a ridiculous creation of alligator skin and gold hardware that cost more than the first car Laura and I ever bought. To her, it wasn't a purchase. It was an acquisition, another prop for the perfect life she broadcasted online. She would have handed her credit card to the sales associate with the easy confidence of someone who has never had to consider the numbers in an account. The associate, a young woman with a practiced, polite smile, would have swiped the card. A small, discreet beep, a slight frown. "I'm sorry, madam," she would say, her voice a polite murmur. "It seems to have been declined." Jessica's first reaction would not be embarrassment. It would be indignation. "That's impossible," she would snap, a sharp edge to her voice. "That's my father's primary account." "Run it again." The associate would try again. The same quiet beep. The same apologetic smile, now a little tighter. Jessica's face would flush. I could picture her snatching the card back, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the plastic. She would rummage in her expensive wallet and produce a different card, a backup. "Fine," she'd say, trying to maintain her composure. "Use this one." Another swipe, another beep. This time the silence that followed would be heavier. The associate would look uncomfortable. Jessica's annoyance would curdle into a hot, prickling panic. This was a direct assault on her identity, an attack on the very foundation of the illusion she lived in. She would turn away from the counter, fumbling for her phone. Her hands, usually so steady for her carefully staged photos, would be trembling slightly. She would call Kyle, her voice a furious, panicked whisper. "What is going on?" The black card was declined. And the platinum visa. Both of them. There would be a pause as she listened to his excuses on the other end. A system-wide error for two different banks at the same time. "That doesn't make any sense, Kyle. Just fix it. I'm standing here trying to buy a purse and I feel like a fool." She would hang up, her frustration momentarily soothed by his reassurances. It was just a glitch, a temporary problem. Then her phone would buzz in her hand with an incoming text message. It was from a number she hadn't called. Mine. She would open it expecting a plea, an angry tirade, a demand to be picked up. But the message on the screen was only 4 words long. "I'm home safe." That was it. No emotion, no explanation. Just a simple factual statement. She would stare at the words, and the blood would drain from her face. The sales associate, the handbag, the public humiliation, it would all fade away. The idea of a random system error would evaporate, replaced by a cold, terrifying certainty. This wasn't a glitch. This was a consequence. My silence was louder than any argument she could have imagined. And in the sterile, quiet luxury of that store, my daughter would feel the very first tremor of the foundation of her world beginning to crack. The documents were signed, notarized, and filed with the city clerk before lunchtime. The new locks on my house felt solid and final. The first phase of the plan was complete. The board was set. The next move was not mine, but Jessica's. And just as Ben had predicted, she walked directly into the trap that her own arrogance had laid. I imagine she returned to the penthouse late that afternoon. She would have been exhausted by a day of frustration, the declined credit cards, and my short, cold text message replaying in her mind. She was likely spoiling for a fight, armed with righteous indignation and ready to confront the father who had dared to inconvenience her. She probably thought she would find me inside waiting, and that a few well-aimed, tearful accusations would be enough to make me back down to restore her access to apologize. She approached the heavy, polished door of her home, a place she considered as much a part of her as her own name, and prepared to assert her ownership. The key slid into the lock with its usual smoothness. She would have turned her wrist with the casual entitlement of someone who has never had a door refuse them entry. But this time the mechanism didn't give. The key stopped hitting a solid, unmoving obstruction. Her first reaction would have been simple confusion. She would pull the key out, examine it, as if it were the faulty component, and slide it back in. Again, it wouldn't turn. The lock was no longer hers to command. The confusion would then curdle into annoyance. She would press the doorbell not just once, but in a series of short, impatient bursts, the chime echoing faintly from within the silent apartment. "Dad," she would call out, her voice sharp. "I know you're in there. This isn't funny. Open the door." Only silence would answer. A deep, indifferent silence that seemed to mock her. The annoyance would now begin to escalate into real anger. She would abandon the bell and use her fist, knocking at first, then banging on the solid wood. The sound would be loud and ugly in the hushed, carpeted hallway of the luxury building. Her perfect composure, the one she curated so carefully for her online audience, would be cracking. Her hair might fall into her face, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of rage and a new, unfamiliar feeling, helplessness. "Dad, open this door right now!" She would scream, the last vestiges of control slipping away. She was a queen pounding on the gates of a castle that no longer recognized her authority. The door, of course, would not yield. It was no longer just a door. It was a statement. Finally exhausted and breathless, she would stop. Leaning her forehead against the cool wood, she would try to catch her breath, her mind racing. And that is when she would see it. It would not have been obvious at first. It was a single sheet of paper folded neatly in thirds and affixed to the door at eye level with a small, precise piece of tape. It was not a casual note. It was official. The sight of it would send a new jolt through her, a cold spike of real dread that cut through her hot anger. With a trembling hand, she would pull the paper from the door. It was a formal document printed on heavy watermarked paper. The letterhead at the top read, "From the law offices of Benjamin Carter." Her breath would catch in her throat. She would unfold the paper. Her eyes would struggle to make sense of the dense legal language. Words and phrases would leap out at her. Notice of title transfer. Revocation of all permissive use and occupancy rights. Effective immediately. But these were just the technical terms for a simple, brutal fact. Then her eyes would fall upon the central clause, the heart of the document, the explanation for the silent lock and the unyielding door. It was the new legal owner of the property, the entity to which she had been so completely and utterly replaced. The name was printed in a clear, bold, inescapable font, the Laura Sterling Memorial Trust. She would read the name once, then twice. The paper would tremble in her hands. This wasn't a punishment. This was an erasure. She hadn't just been locked out of a piece of property. She had been written out of a legacy. In her place in the very center of the life she had claimed for herself was the memory of the mother she had failed to honor. Standing there in the silent hallway under the cold, recessed lighting, with a worthless key in one hand and an unbreakable legal truth in the other, my daughter would finally understand. This was not a game. This was not a negotiation. This was a wall, and she was on the outside. The legal notice was not a request for a conversation. It was the conversation. It was the beginning, the middle, and the end of the only discussion I was willing to have. I knew what would come next. The shock would give way to rage, and the rage would curdle into a frantic, desperate attempt to regain control. I was sitting in my armchair, a book open on my lap, when the first tremor of her panic reached my quiet living room. My phone was on the small wooden table beside me, placed face down. I had turned the ringer off. I didn't want to hear her voice, not even the synthesized chime assigned to it. The first call announced itself as a sharp, angry buzz against the wood. The vibration was a jarring intrusion into the evening's peace. I didn't move. I didn't even look at it. I just knew. The screen hidden from my view would be lit up with her name. A moment of silence followed as the call went to voicemail. Then, almost immediately, the buzzing started again and again. It was a frantic, irregular heartbeat, the frantic pulse of a world thrown into chaos. Through the gaps in the buzzing, my own house remained serene. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed the hour, its deep, resonant tones a measure of a different kind of time. A slower, more deliberate time. I took a sip of my tea. The warmth of the ceramic mug was a comforting, solid presence in my hands. Outside, a light rain began to fall, tapping gently against the window panes. The phone, however, was in the middle of a hurricane. The buzzing stopped and was replaced by a series of quick, successive vibrations, signaling incoming text messages, one after another after another. Then the calls resumed. The 5th call became the 10th. I watched the phone as it shuddered on the table, a small black object possessed by my daughter's hysteria. The light from its screen bled out from underneath, casting a pulsing, urgent glow on the polished wood. This was the part of the process I had dreaded, yet I felt strangely detached from it. It was like watching a storm rage from behind a thick, protective wall. Her panic, her anger, her disbelief, none of it could touch me here. I had made my decision in the cold, clarifying silence of the desert. I had formalized it in the quiet, solemn air of Ben's office. I refused to let her drag me back into the noise. There were no words left to say. My actions were my final statement. The count in my head continued. The 20th call became the 30th. The buzzing was relentless now, a constant, desperate plea for the attention it had always taken for granted. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old paternal instinct, the urge to answer, to soothe, to fix. But I pushed it away. Fixing this was no longer my job. This was a consequence she had to navigate alone. Finally, after a long barrage, the phone fell silent. The quiet that followed felt profound. I thought perhaps the storm had passed. I read a full page of my book. Then it buzzed one last time, a long, drawn-out vibration that seemed to carry all the weight of her desperation. And then nothing. The silence held. After a minute, I reached over and picked up the phone. I didn't look at the texts or the voicemails. I just glanced at the lock screen. There, in small, neat numbers below her name, was the final tally of her frantic attempt to break through my wall. 55 missed calls. I turned the phone off completely and placed it back on the table. The rain continued to tap against the glass, washing the world clean. A week of silence had passed. A week of unanswered calls and unread texts. It was a silence that had finally become so loud, so heavy, that Jessica and Kyle could no longer ignore it. They had no choice but to respond to the formal, non-negotiable email from Ben Carter's office. An email that did not invite but summoned them to a meeting. I was in the conference room with Ben a full 15 minutes early. It was a space designed to be devoid of personality. A long glass table reflected the gray, overcast sky. The chairs were black leather and chrome. The air was cool and still. It was a room for contracts and conclusions, not for family. I felt a strange sense of calm. I was not here as a father, but as the chairman of my own life, present, to witness the ratification of a decision that had already been made. Jessica and Kyle arrived precisely on time. They walked in attempting to project an aura of offended authority. Kyle had his jaw set, a cheap imitation of a powerful man ready for battle. Jessica's face was a carefully constructed mask of wounded innocence. But I could see the fear in their eyes, the frantic uncertainty that my silence had instilled in them. They sat opposite us, the vast, empty expanse of the glass table like a chasm between two worlds. Before Kyle could launch his opening salvo, Ben placed his hands flat on the table. His presence was calm, absolute, and in complete control. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice neutral. "This meeting is not a negotiation. It is a notification. I am here to inform you of a series of legal actions that have been taken by my client, Mr. David Sterling. We will proceed in an orderly fashion." He slid a single document across the table. "First, this is a legally executed revocation of power of attorney. As of 11 a.m. yesterday, your authority to act on Mr. Sterling's behalf in any financial capacity has been terminated. Kyle snatched the paper, his eyes scanning it with a feigned legal expertise. Jessica just stared at me as if waiting for me to wink and tell her it was all a joke. Ben continued, his voice as steady as a metronome. He slid a much thicker document across the glass. Second, this is the filed and recorded deed of transfer for the property located at 1400 Cityview Plaza Penthouse B. The property has been transferred into a new, irrevocable trust. Kyle's head shot up. You can't do that, he scoffed. We have a vested interest in that property. We've been managing it. Ben didn't even blink. He reached over to a separate file and opened it to a marked page, turning it around for Kyle to see. It was the original power of attorney agreement. If you will direct your attention to Article 4, subsection C of the document you yourself advised Mr. Sterling to sign. Mr. Thorne, you will note that all powers granted are contingent upon acting in the grantor's best interest. I think you'll find that abandoning a 69-year-old man on a remote highway without access to food, water, or communication would be considered by any court in this country to be a profound violation of that fiduciary duty. You have no vested interest. You have only a record of gross negligence. Kyle's face went pale. He had been so proud of his clever legal document, and Ben had just turned it into a weapon against him. And on the subject of your management, Ben said, his voice taking on a colder edge. He slid a thin, spiral-bound report across the table. It landed in front of Jessica. This is a summary of expenditures from Mr. Cohn, Sterling's secondary accounts to which you were a signatory over the last 18 months. He leaned back. It includes, among other things, $15,000 for a week at a Balinese resort, $8,000 for a designer watch for Mr. Thorne, $22,000 for a country club membership, and a recurring monthly payment of $6,000 listed only as lifestyle consulting. My client was unaware he had hired a lifestyle consultant. The color drained from Jessica's face. The numbers on the page were a stark, undeniable indictment of her greed. The legal arguments were lost on her, but this she understood. Her carefully constructed mask finally shattered. All the legal documents, all the financial figures, they were just props. The final act was always going to be personal. She turned her tear-filled eyes to me, her voice breaking with practiced sorrow. Dad, she whispered, her voice trembling. How could you do this? After everything, how could you do this to me? I'm your daughter. I had been silent the entire meeting, a spectator at my own life's restructuring. Now for the first time I met her gaze. Her tears did not move me. They were just another currency she was used to spending. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list her betrayals. I simply reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and took out a small old photograph, its corners softened with time. I slid it across the glass table. It glided over the polished surface and came to a stop directly in front of her. It was a picture of her mother. Laura was standing on the side of a dusty road, squinting happily into the Arizona sun, with the red rock formations of the desert stretching out behind her. It was the very same stretch of road where Jessica had left me. Jessica stared at the photograph. Her manufactured tears stopped. The color drained from her face, leaving a sickly, waxy pallor. The image on the table was a ghost, a witness to a crime she thought had been committed in secret. I leaned forward just slightly. My voice, when I finally spoke, was not angry. It was not sad. It was a simple statement of fact, as cold and clear as the glass between us. Your mother, I said, would never have done this. I let the words hang in the silent room. Jessica couldn't look away from the photo. She couldn't look at me. And her legacy, I added, my voice dropping to a near whisper, will not be exploited. I pushed my chair back and stood up. Ben stood with me. The meeting was over. There was nothing else to say. The truth was there on the table, captured in a faded photograph, more powerful than any legal document, and more final than any locked door. After the meeting in Ben's office, there were no more confrontations. There were no angry phone calls, no desperate text messages. There was only a profound and widening silence. I did not seek out news of Jessica and Kyle. I did not need to. A life built on a foundation of sand does not need a demolition crew. It simply collapses under its own weight. The story of their new reality came to me in fragments, small pieces of a life being unbuilt. I heard from a distant cousin that they had to leave the temporary corporate apartment they had rented. I pictured them not in a dramatic eviction, but in the quiet humiliation of loading cardboard boxes into the back of a rented moving truck. The designer clothes and expensive electronics would look jarring and out of place against the backdrop of a drab suburban apartment complex with peeling paint and anonymous balconies. I imagined them arguing their partnership once united in the easy pursuit of my wealth, now fractured by the hard reality of a shared budget. A few weeks later, Ben mentioned that the leasing company for their luxury SUV had been in touch. They couldn't locate the vehicle. Eventually, it was repossessed, not from the pristine garage of a downtown penthouse, but from a street-side parking spot in a neighborhood they never would have visited before. The image of that gleaming monument to their status being hoisted onto a flatbed tow truck was a stark symbol. The vehicle, like their lifestyle, had been a rental, and the payment was long overdue. Out of a quiet, lingering curiosity one afternoon, I looked at Jessica's social media page. It was a digital ghost town. The last post from a month ago showed her laughing on a yacht, a champagne flute in her hand. The caption read, "Living my best life." After that, nothing. The daily updates on expensive meals, exotic trips, and luxury purchases had ceased. Her curated world, once a vibrant stream of manufactured perfection, was now a stagnant pond. The thousands of followers who had admired her life had fallen silent, moving on to the next bright, shiny object. Her influence, her very identity, had been built on my money. When the money disappeared, so did she. I felt no joy in these images, only a deep, abiding sadness. They were not just facing financial hardship. They were facing reality for the first time. They were learning in the harshest way possible that a life is not what you can buy, but what you can build. The safety net I had provided for 38 years was gone. They were in a free fall, and the ground rushing up to meet them was a world of consequences, a world where you have to earn your own keep and live with the choices you make. They were finally on their own, a lesson I had tried and failed to teach them my entire life. A few months have passed. I am standing in the penthouse again. It is the first time I have been back since the locks were changed. It is empty now. All of Jessica's designer furniture, her expensive art, her life of curated luxury has been removed, sold off to pay debts I was no longer funding. The rooms are vast and silent, filled only with the pale afternoon light pouring in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I am not here alone. With me are two women from the Haven House, the shelter my wife Laura gave so much of her time to. They are looking around, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. I hold out a set of keys on a simple silver ring. "It's yours," I say to the director, a kind woman with tired, hopeful eyes. A safe place, a new start. That's what Laura would have wanted. She takes the keys from my hand, her fingers closing around them. "Mr. Sterling," she says, her voice thick with emotion, "this is more than a new start. For the women we serve, this is a new world." After they leave, I walk through the empty rooms one last time. For years, I built a kingdom for my daughter, thinking that was love. But love isn't about building walls around someone. Love is about giving them a foundation to build for themselves. I was left on a desolate road, but it was there that I found my way back. My legacy isn't in skyscrapers or the numbers in an account. It is in the memory of a woman named Laura, and in the second chance we can now give to those who truly need it. As for those 55 missed calls I never needed to answer, my silence was the clearest answer of all. I slide open the glass door and step out onto the balcony. The city stretches out before me, a vast and intricate map of a million different lives. The air is cool and clean this high up, and the roar of the traffic below is just a distant rhythmic hum, like the sound of the ocean. For years, this view represented the peak of my daughter's ambition, a symbol of a life of excess. But now looking at it, I see something different. I see a community. I see a world full of people just trying to find their way. A sense of peace settles over me deeper and more profound than any I have felt in years. It is not the silence of an empty home, but the quiet of a life that has finally been put in right order. The accounts have been balanced. The foundation is secure. And for the first time in a long, long time, I feel truly at home. This story serves as a powerful reminder that there is a vast difference between providing for someone and enabling them. David's generosity, born from a father's love, was misinterpreted by his daughter as an endless resource she was entitled to. The cruel act of being abandoned was not just a betrayal, but a moment of painful clarity. The ultimate lesson is that setting boundaries is not an act of punishment, but a necessary act of self-respect. It teaches us that our true legacy is not defined by the wealth we pass down, but by the values we uphold and the dignity we refuse to surrender. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between helping a loved one and protecting your own self-respect? Let us know in the comments below, and subscribe for more stories that make you think.